It's a very civic kind of invitation. First of all, you should all join the Friends of the library. Who wouldn't want to be one of the friends? You know, it's like a kid's show. If she said, hey, you want to join the enemies and the haters group, maybe you wouldn't do that. But the Friends, how can you not join the Friends? But I don't know Linda until today, but I had met her son, Brian, who was here, in a Teaching American History program, which is a federally funded program from the now on life support Department of Education, which was ended by Obama. It was a long-running program, one of the biggest the department ever ran, that really worked with local teachers to give innovative ideas on how to teach history and civics and government. I think Brian enjoyed it. We've talked a lot about it. Ran for 6 years, and it was a great program. And then it came around that his mother introduced me to come to this. So thank you very, very much on that. I will try to be nonpartisan. Nonpartisan and balanced doesn't mean everything is in the middle. Truth isn't spatial. It clusters at the ends. But I will do my best. It is a challenging thing to do in these times. A very challenging thing to do, but it always has been, and that's one of my points. This is a picture I like to use. It's an old picture of an American election, even long before I was voting. And it's interesting in a bunch of ways because it's chaotic. You think elections are chaotic now, they're pretty well organized now. It was only men, and because it was only men, it was drunken and full of criminality. There's a drunk here, passed out, and there's another one over here. There's two, and then there's some dogs and little kids. But when you voted, it was public. Because you'd walk in and I can't remember the colors, I think it was red, it might have still been red and blue, whatever they had colors for then. When you printed, you had to ask for that ballot. And it was the whole party. So if you asked for red, then everybody that saw you knew who you were voting for, and factory owners or large landowners, prominent people that might have power over your family in some way or another, would watch for that kind of thing and punish people that didn't vote the way that they wanted them to vote. But there is something unique about American democracy in that it's quite old. The notion of democracy is very old too, but the actual practice in the modern world of it, America is pretty old. And I'm going to argue one of the things I'll mention today, and you may not agree with me, and you may not even like it when I say it, is that I don't think people actually really like democracy that much. I think they like to say they do. I think they like to paint things on the wall that says more democracy. But at the end of the day, what people want is what they want. They want someone to do what they want. And they don't want someone to do what they don't want. And if it happens to be an authoritarian doing what you want, if it's not, maybe not so much. That's a little controversial. But again, I'm jumping ahead, the World Values surveys and some other surveys I'm going to mention that people really do value the question or notion of freedom more than the question and notion of democracy. And that human beings tend often, when pushed on the question, to like certain authoritarian characteristics. The strong person. I got to say the strong man, because that's often how it's manifested in popular culture. So I'm going to start a little bit with a biography, mostly because everybody loves to talk about themselves, and here I am. I get the chance to do that, so I'm going to indulge it, but mostly to link it to the talk, not random. And there are a lot of linkages in this question. And sort of just roughly say, where are we right now? I know if you're here, you either came here by accident or you came because a friend wanted you to come. But most likely you came because it's a topic that interests you. And if it's a topic of interest, you're probably pretty politically engaged and knowledgeable. This group of people probably far exceeds your average American group in terms of interest in politics and following politics. But still, so you'll know some of the stuff I say. But it's good to start with some grounding of just basic numbers, I think. Then I'm going to talk about the divisions. Again, you're familiar with many of these, overly familiar probably with many of these. I'll try to discuss them in a world context a little bit And then I'm going to end with just some thoughts that I have on citizenship and how to cope, because I find it difficult to do. And I've been around. I mean, I've been in politics most of my life. I'm used to ugliness, debate, fights, the whole thing. I'm not a cynic, but I'm cynic adjacent. You know, I think in some ways. I don't have any illusions. Well, maybe I do. Maybe I have some. I hope I do. Still have some. But, you know, you're familiar with many of these divisions. And they are, of course, they are famously increasing. But I would emphasize again, you look at this previous slide, how ugly that election could be. And elections have always been ugly. When Jefferson ran against Adams's campaign, they never said anything themselves, but he had a paid newspaper person say if Jefferson won, blood would run red in the streets and the country would be rampant with rape, incest, murder, and war. Pretty harsh. There was a rumor spread in the Netherlands of the West, Pittsburgh, I guess, that Jefferson was dead. Because who the hell would know that? Like if Trump died, you would know in the room, because somebody's not listening to me. Someone's looking at their phone. They'd be going, oh my God, the president died. If you interrupted me with that, that would be legitimate. But if it's like Red Sox spring training stuff, let's hold that off till the end. You know, overall. But so it was a nasty tactic. And they were always expensive. They always cost a lot of money. When Washington first ran for office, he spent hundreds of dollars in his own, which would be thousands now. And who could guess what it was all spent on, 100% of it? Beer. Liquor. All of it spent on liquor. Were you at that campaign? No, but I ran some. Americans used to drink a lot more than they do now. I mean, the amount of consumption in some areas of America is measured per person by gallons. And that includes little kids. They weren't drinking it, but they were bringing the people number up. Yeah. And so talk a little bit then at the end about modes of citizenship. But the first thing I want to do is we're going to warm up a little bit. The question, what is a citizen, is very abstract. And so I'm going to ask you not what is a citizen right now. We'll talk about that. But is there any definition out there of what it is to be an American citizen? There is. But I wonder if it...
Well, they often talk about rights and responsibilities. And I think many people, if you push them, they would come up with a few rights, and they might come up with a few responsibilities.
Yes.
Whether that's full enough of a description, I don't know.
No, but you're right, and I think when we discuss it, we all have certain rights in mind, and we all have certain responsibilities in mind. But there's actually a document. My guess is no one in this room has read it. Well, there's a reason for that. There's a reason for it. I can't see and I can't. But what's the next, there's a talk on what, Polish immigration?
Yes.
There's a hint.
Native born.
The oath of citizenship. There are millions of Americans who know technically and legally what it means to be a U.S. citizen because they read the oath. And I'm going to read it so we can take a look at it. Don't panic. It's not like 26 pages long. Although with my vision, it could take me that long to read it. It's very short, like the Constitution, but it's very interesting, and I think it sets up the talk. This is when cartoonish stuff on PowerPoint, if you don't have your thing in the right order, is annoying. So we can all see it, but if you don't mind, I'm going to read it because I may emphasize a few things in it as we go. And then we'll get into it, and we can keep this in mind for at the end, I want to ask people what they consider to be actions of citizenship. Not definitions, but actions. I hereby declare on oath that I absolutely and entirely renounce and abjure all allegiance, and fidelity to any foreign prince, potentate, state, or sovereignty, of whom or which I have heretofore been the subject as a citizen. Now, first of all, that's an interesting sentence because you can have dual citizenship now in the United States. It's a fairly reasonably recent development. My daughter's about to become a German and American citizen, and my grandson's a German and American citizen. He's 3, so he doesn't know that yet. But he speaks both languages, and he can say no in like 6 different languages. Overall. Then, I will support and defend the Constitution and laws of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. You're not pledging to support the president. You're not pledging to support Massachusetts. You're not pledging to support the Congress. You're not pledging to support God. You're pledging to support the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. It's an interesting and very, very unique at the time statement. That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same. That I will bear arms on behalf of the United States when required by the law. That I will perform non-combatant services in the armed forces of the United States when required by the law. And that I will perform work of national importance under civilian direction when required by the law. Those are very specific things. They're very specific. Defend the Constitution is pretty general. We can argue about what that means. And I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, so help me God. Now the so help me God now can be omitted. If there's certain religions that it's a sin to take an oath. So the oath part at the beginning and then the God part can be altered. And then there's people who are atheists and would like to become a citizen. It'd be interesting to see if they try to reverse that. Now anyway, so we can keep that in mind, but that's an actionable statement that millions of Americans have read over time to become a citizen, including probably most of our ancestors at some point or other, although they might not remember it. Mine would not. They're Irish. They didn't so much as immigrate as sneak away, I think. So in terms of biography and why it's relevant is, first, I'm a former Republican. Whenever I say that in Massachusetts, I feel like I'm in an AA meeting. But not just a former Republican. I was the director of the Massachusetts Republican Party and the political director of the Massachusetts Republican Party and a Republican political consultant for 22 years. I worked with a new Roger Stone. I worked with a new Roger Ailes. We weren't, personally close, but they were clients of mine. So I can tell you with some personal experience that Fox News is not news. And I'm not being partisan. Roger Ailes, will you be able to do so? And he honestly said, we're making money on this deal. And they are making quite a bit of money. So I mentioned that as part of this. I'm grappling. That's the word I use in this. I'm grappling with the current circumstances in America. And part of it is this notion of guilt. At the time, a number of the Republicans that I work with, I still to this day greatly admire. Andrew Natsios was the chairman of the party. He went on to become one of the longest serving, if not the longest serving directors of USAID. He's a very big proponent of using American power, soft power, in that world, which I have come into that world, and so has my daughter, and to a lesser extent my son. Paul Cellucci, who I had a lot of admiration for, Jane Swift, who I worked with and worked for when she was governor, Bill Weld. I always thought they were decent people. I'd work for them again. But there were people that we also formed alliances with in the 80s when Reagan got elected, and Reagan seems like that's ancient history. Well, definitely. I mean, Obama's ancient history to my students. We made some alliances to try to get votes, and looking back on some of the people, they were precursors of what we're seeing now. They were Democrats. Everybody is in Massachusetts for the most part. But conservative, very conservative, cultural, conservative Democrats. Like the Modified Motorcycle Association. They were against helmet laws. I've worked hard to form an alliance with them. That was something, going to those meetings. Go to the Republican Town Committee meeting in Dover, and then the Modified Motorcycle Association meeting. As I get older, I'm more and looking more and more at the possibility of transplants. As I get older, I'm more ambiguous about the notion of helmets. So I look back on history and I think, I did some things that maybe I didn't like. I was in my 20s, but that's not an excuse, right? I did what I did because it was my job and I wanted to win. In '84, Reagan won Massachusetts. We picked up 7 seats in the Massachusetts Senate, a number of seats in the House. There was a high watermark of the party. It's been downhill since then. Well, I guess with the Weld election. I've taught over 15,000 students. So why do I mention that? I mention that because for many, many years I would tell them in classes, because you repeat yourself when you're a professor all the time, and one of my repetitions was, I've worked all over the world. The U.S. is pretty lucky to have the choices that they have. I was thinking of Dukakis and Bush, Kerry and George W. I'm not saying, by the way, you need to agree with me on this, but I think looking backwards, perhaps you might. McCain, Obama. There are countries, I work a lot in Pakistan. I've been there a number of times, a lot of times, and I can tell you with some certainty that the Pakistanis would really have enjoyed that kind of choice for president. But I'm not as certain I would say that anymore. Things have changed. And so looking back on in other words, looking back on some of the assumptions I lived with, I feel naive in that sense. I've worked in many countries, politically as well as running exchange programs, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. Mostly, though, in somewhat difficult and challenging places. Indonesia, which is a beautiful place if you ever get a chance to go. Pakistan and Iraq. And oddly enough, Argentina. A lot of work in Argentina. If you've got to go to at least one country that has wine, they would be it on that list for the most part. So I've seen, authoritarian regimes, and I've seen the results of terrible political systems that have tortured and arrested their people, continue to this day in some places to disappear human beings on a regular basis. You never read about it in the news, but it still goes on. And so I mentioned that biography piece because they always have interesting takes on the United States. And they often are more positive about the United States than I am. A lot of young Pakistanis, initially, they were really excited about the election of Trump. They were like, oh, he's going to get Imran Khan out of prison. And now they're like, well, he's trying to prevent us from even coming here. Like, yes, it's what he said he was going to do. You shouldn't be surprised. There should be no surprises, by the way. So that has informed the question of citizenship. We are lucky to be able to ask the question of citizenship. We are very privileged to have an option of how to act. We had a gentleman on a program this summer, I called him PC. The Chinese, sometimes they think their name's unpronounceable to us. And so they come up with a nickname, and his nickname was PC. And I'm like, well, what's your what do you get called at home? Po. I was like, I could handle Po. PC's harder than Po, PC. He was a very good scholar of Western liberalism. He worked with it on Chinese Confucian philosophy, and they're really very good, brilliant gentleman. He's from Hong Kong. He has been arrested numerous times. A lot of his friends are in prison. They were put in prison recently. But the interesting thing about Po is whenever he got up to introduce himself, people would get up and say, I'm Linda from Algeria. There actually was a Linda from Algeria. And that was her actual name. It wasn't just, you can't say my name. I'm Mike from the U.S., etc. But he always said, I'm PC from Hong Kong. He says, I'm not from China. I'm Chinese, but I'm not from China. And he always said that. made a point of it. It was kind of startling to me because I hadn't run into that before. But he's not allowed to do what we can do. And you can never, I don't think we should ever forget that. So it's informed me a great deal. Also, I am not from here, although I don't know how long it takes to be from someplace. I moved here in 1980. I was the same age as when you had Brian. I was -5. When I was 20, I came out to get my master's at UMass. And, but not only am I from Ohio, but I'm from like my mother's family makes J.D. Vance look like the Vanderbilts. You know, I'm a redneck. And I understood what that meant. When I read Hillbilly Elegy, there was a lot of things that resonated with me. Springfield, Ohio, which is where I'm from, is considerably worse than Middletown, Ohio, which is where J.D. Vance is from. And don't get me going on that too much. But so, you know, I'm from a very different part of the world. And I would like to emphasize, has anybody here ever heard of Springfield, Ohio? Yeah, we don't eat our pets. We don't even eat other people's pets. And the fact that they spread that lie, and it was a lie, again, I said I'm going to be nonpartisan, I'm not going to lie. It was a lie. The Haitian immigrants that are there are not eating people's pets. But the county, which I'm going to show you in a minute, still voted overwhelmingly for Trump. So they didn't care about lies about their city, which made their city a joke. They've been used to that for years, actually. So I could talk a little bit about the Haitian immigration to Springfield, but I will give you one startling number. There are real issues in the world. They're not all fake. And so Springfield has, I could get some numbers wrong, but roughly 60, 70,000 people. It's much poorer than Springfield, Massachusetts, just a matter of perspective on that. Opioid epidemic has been just devastating. I was visiting my mother there. She was in the hospital. All of her doctors, interestingly enough, were Pakistani. And just the short time I was visiting, 3-4 days a week, spread out over time, I saw 4 people come in and just fall on the floor with an opioid overdose, and just somebody rushed out and just Narcaned them right there. And they even give it away for free now in the drugstores. So people have, it's a spray now, not an injection. They can, it's like redneck Flonase, you know, in that sense. It's terrible. But yeah, so I'm from there. So I do have a slightly different perspective on things. Massachusetts, this part of Massachusetts, of course, is very liberal. In fact, we'll have a little quiz. I want to make a point and talk about some numbers. First, this election was not a landslide. It was one of the closest elections in modern history. The House came out as one of the closest houses of all time. Only a couple of votes. I think it's 5 now separating. And there's 4 or 5 vacancies right now. The Senate, of course, the Republicans did pretty well in the Senate. They were almost destined to take it because of the numbers. But to lose Pennsylvania and Ohio was, I think, a surprise to people. Maybe not a shock, but a surprise. So small numbers matter. And you've got to keep that in mind when you talk about U.S. politics. Small numbers matter. There's a tiny number of human beings changing their mind again, but the consequences of those small number changes are enormous. Enormous. So small numbers matter, but small numbers can mean a huge change. Just an example, this is how close the House is, 218 and 213. That's very close. That's only a 2 or 3 vote difference between winning and losing. And that gives a couple of Republicans or Democrats that might switch their vote a lot of power. The Senate is more solid in the hands of Republicans. The 2 independents, they caucus with the Democrats all the time, so you can essentially call them Democrats. Both are New England, which is interesting. So this is just Pennsylvania. The difference between the Biden and the Clinton election, of course, Clinton lost Pennsylvania, Biden won. Pennsylvania was 0.011. So I'm just trying to emphasize this small numbers matter. Small numbers matter. The positive side of that means if you lost, you probably figure you should be able to win next time because you didn't get crushed. You know, it's not like the Republicans in the 70s after Watergate. for the Democrats in the 80s under Reagan. These are small numbers. So here's some numbers. I'm from Clark County, Ohio. Springfield is, I couldn't find the city broken out, so counties are more important in Ohio than they are here. Biden got 24,076 votes. Trump got 79,032. I didn't get the Harris numbers. It was similar to this, although a little worse. Keep in mind those two words, a little worse. So let's see, talk about Hadley for a minute. I talked to my wife about it. She's lived here for a long time too, and there's a stereotype that Amherst and Hadley are super different. Hadley's this conservative town. People move there because it's not Amherst. I never really bought that because I've been working in politics for a long time. But nonetheless, if you're don't answer this, by the way, if you're the town clerk. And you got a knowledgeable group, you probably know this. But what percentage do you think that Biden got in Hadley?
65.
75.
So we got 55 and 80.
65, 70.
It's a 70.9 for Biden. And what about Harris? She got 67. And there was also a lower turnout.
That's amazing.
I mentioned those Hadley just because it's always fun to talk about your own town. It's obviously a heavily Democratic town. 70% is a huge number. But the United States, Biden got 51%, 51.3. And Harris got 48.3. 3 points.
How many were third party?
3 points. Very few. Hadley was a handful. Just a handful. It wouldn't have been enough for me if I included them to well, it would be the difference between these two numbers and 100, which isn't much. So the point of that, to get this small numbers matter thing, 3 percentage points. It's pretty small. But it was a 3% drop for Harris over Biden that changed the election. And it happened in Hadley. It didn't matter because sadly it was overwhelmingly voting, so Harris could afford to lose it. I went to my final part of my biography, so I decided, what am I going to do? I was agonizing, what am I going to do? So I decided I was supposed to have my hip replaced, but I decided, well, I'm going to get the cortisone shot and pray it works. And I moved to Pennsylvania. I have a good friend there and stayed at their house in Shippensburg, Pennsylvania. And I did door-to-door for a month and a half. I did it for Harrison Walls, I will admit. And of course, that shot wore off like the day or two after I got there, and I was having eye trouble too, and I had an eye patch on. So I had a cane and an eye patch. You imagine like knocking on someone's door, and their little kid's like, "Hey, Mom, where's a pirate? Come in. Yeah, door."
Get any people shooting at him?
No, but I got a little sick of like, "Where's the parrot?" And finally, I got a little New England snarky about it. I'm like, hey, that's really original. You come up with that yourself? I had a couple people yell at me. But look, I'm an old dude. Nobody's gonna. I was polite. People were very unfailingly polite. There. And we were also knocking on doors that this is the sad part of the story, that supposedly were people inclined to Harris, because they were on Josh Shapiro's list. But again, this is where the 3 points comes down. She wasn't never going to win Franklin County, Pennsylvania. She's never going to win Cumberland County, Pennsylvania. But the Harris campaign had a goal of getting 2% more out of all of the counties that they lost. Problem is they got 3% less. Almost exactly 3% less. And the turnout was less. And that was just enough for the Republican Senate candidate to win too, against a pretty conservative Democrat, pro-life Democrat. But
Weren't there also a lot of non-voters?
on the door knocking was all based on voter lists. So it was too late in the game to be doing things like registration. And I did poll sitting too, and that was interesting because the place I was at, there was a Republican, and I guess I was the Harris guy. I don't think they even knew I was from out of state, but they didn't have a lot of volunteers. And the volunteers were all women. Like I went to the first meeting, and it was like me and 33 women. And it's like, well, this campaign's got definitely visual confirmation of national polls. And even when you knocked on doors, you would get that. Well, my husband's not home, but I'm not voting for that asshole. But he is. And the men, if a man was there, they would be a little more surly about it. You know, they'd be like, well, I'm voting for Trump. I said, well, do you know who your wife's voting for? Well, she better be voting for Trump too. So I'm like, she's not going to vote for Trump. But of course, you know, people do. I mean, you got over 50% of the white female vote. So the point is that to lead into the divisions in America, I was a poll watcher, and people would come in and he would challenge everybody who was brown. And his definition of brown was pretty broad. Like maybe somebody had been in Florida for a few weeks. And there were surprisingly large immigrant communities in these areas. There's immigrant communities everywhere in the United States now. They're not just confined to the coasts, you know. And so I was getting sort of upset about this. It's clearly a delaying tactic. It makes the line longer. It was a precinct that was probably going to vote for Harris. So I started challenging. If a white man came in, especially if they looked anything at all like me, I challenged them. I challenged their citizenship. And it was very interesting because I would say, I challenge that voter. I'd like to see proof of citizenship. Anybody here got proof of citizenship with them?
Yeah.
What is it?
Passport.
Well, driver's license is not proof of citizenship.
Passport.
Passport, if you got your passport, that is proof of citizenship.
Birth certificate?
Yep, so if a lot of you are carrying around your passport and your birth certificate, you're definitely on the run from something.
Isn't the real ID?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know. I tried to look it up before I came, but in Massachusetts law, you can get a driver's license. You don't have to be a citizen. So, and in Pennsylvania it was the same way, so they didn't have citizenship on their driver's license. So they'd be like, what are you talking about? I'm obviously a citizen. No, you're obviously white. You could be Polish. I was just being an ass, but the other guy stopped because the poll worker got upset. And she was kind of scary, so I didn't want to do it. So that's a contrast between two areas that I've lived in, and I hope a little insight into your own town and how your town links into the national stuff as well. So there is huge results from this, we all know it. Major changes in foreign policy with the Ukraine and a move towards Russia. Incredibly different types of appointments that you would get from Democrats, which, you know, that's acceptable. If you win, you win. Increasing number of deportations, often challenged by the courts. Literal challenging of the courts, whether or not the courts are legitimate, which is I think, a frightening. Even if you're a big Trump fan, you should be able to have the imagination to imagine a Democratic Trump who is the precedent of not paying any attention to the courts. What would stop him from just arresting Elon Musk under the Alien Act? I don't think that's going to happen, by the way. But, you know, when the courts are gone, I'm not sure what's left. In that sense, they're going to get rid of the Department of Education, although he's not unique. The Republicans have been saying that for a long time. He didn't just think of that, but he's doing it. And then, of course, the USAID, this is my world. The State Department, Voice of America was almost completely closed yesterday or the day before, as well as Radio Free Europe. So he's essentially getting rid of any form of soft power. It's not part of my talk, but I'll mention it real quick. I'm going to take my time. Okay, so the head of the Department of Education, I tell my students, if you really want to understand the phenomenon of Trump winning, not Trump, but Trump winning, they're not the same thing, you should watch Mr. McMahon. Has anybody here ever seen the miniseries, Mr. McMahon? You would be the guy I would have picked to have seen the series, because you're much younger than anyone else here. I think, by the way, I can't see. very well.
It was very interesting miniseries, I have to say.
Yeah, it's about Vince McMahon, who he didn't start it, but he made professional wrestling huge. He sort of discovered Hulk Hogan. It wasn't like Hogan was hiding in a corner somewhere. He weighs 300 pounds. But whatever it was, if you can think of, you probably don't watch it, but if you can think of world wrestling at its height, he made it what it is. And it was super masculine. Way out there masculinity. And Trump announced a couple of, before he was Trump announced a couple of the bouts, etc. So why do I talk about this? I think there's a lot about that show that explains why so many young men vote for Donald Trump. Because he is the World Federation Wrestling of politics. He's large, loud, in charge, and showy. And they often take that to be tough. They often take that to be tough. But there is a bigger connection. Department of Education, his wife, is the Secretary of Education. Or ex-wife. I think he passed away, didn't he? I don't know. He'd be in his 80s. She's considerably younger, but she's the Secretary of Education. Linda McMahon, who also is really from the world of wrestling. You know, and I think from Connecticut, but I'm not sure. Closer to home and personal, you know, I run these exchange programs and have for 25 years. We don't know if we're going to have any money this summer. I've been a Fulbrighter and worked with Fulbrighters. I know some that are stuck in other countries because they just ended their program without paying for their plane tickets to get home. People here from other countries who have a Fulbright that their programs have stopped funding. They may start again, by the way, but all of USAID is being shut down when it was existing, unless the courts stop it, and that could happen. When it went down, the stuff went down, I was in Burundi, Africa. My daughter lives there. She works for the UN. And all sorts of the people that we were with just lost their jobs. The entire healthcare sector of Burundi, not like primary care, but AIDS, malaria, typhoid, measles, that kind of big picture stuff. Two things happened. One is no U.S. money could be used for anybody who is transgender or gay. Which, I mean, in Burundi, they're pretty anti-gay already. You're not going to say you're gay. And if you're transgender in Burundi, I don't know, you're probably not. It's a tough place. But still, to make that an explicit requirement, and of course people are just going to lie about it or go underground. And when those kind of things happen, those sorts of diseases, they spread, you know. And when they spread, then they endanger the United States. In other words, an investment in our own country. But my point of that is it deeply affects my own world. It also affects UMass. So I don't think I thought I cut and pasted it, but maybe I didn't. UMass is struggling with a couple of executive orders. I don't know if anyone here works for UMass. You work for UMass, right? And one of them is the names of the executive orders are funny, but it's like, you know, an order to end the radical and wasteful government spending and discriminatory effects of DEI. And so power is real. And so once the president said that, some people started to obey in advance, including many parts of UMass started to scrub their websites of any offensive words. They weren't told to, but they heard it. Because UMass gets a lot of federal money. I mean, it's not a majority of their money by any means, but still, it's a lot of money, and it's got to be filled somewhere, you know. But then they have to certify that they don't have any DEI programs before any grants can go to the university. And this is a big controversy around the country. Lots of universities have joined in suits, but it's holding money up for, I keep saying my little thing, I'm actually retired. The new director is a woman named Becky Howland, who I've worked with for many years. We can't even get our little tiny slices of the money, waiting for the university lawyers and the lawsuits. And power is real. Listen, the people that think it's just a bunch of words, they're wrong. They have real life effects on things. So there are a lot of divisions. there's basically become two visions of America, I think. I'm going to show a few surveys. One thing that's become evident over time is the clustering of extremes. So now you total up very conservative and conservative now outweigh moderate in the United States. That's a new development. Moderate usually has been the biggest category. And you can also see that conservative and very conservative considerably outweigh liberal and very liberal. Now these terms, what do they mean? You know, but if you ask the same question over time for a long time, they have some comparative ability. It's Gallup, they're a very good pollster. There's something called the World Values Survey, and it had some startling results in the last few years. One is that U.S. conservatives are completely different in the values that they have from their U.S. counterparts, especially when it comes to the world. But even more startling is their considerable differences with their European conservatives. That they have almost no desire to have anything to do with the world. That power is a zero-sum game. It should be exercised in an authoritarian manner. That there should be very little or no immigration to the United States. We should be insulated from that. And very much against international cooperation. So things like the UN, NATO, any kind of treaty organizations. That it's just an exercise in power. It's like isolationism, essentially, going back to Calvin Coolidge in that sense. But with a much more aggressive American stance towards the rest of the world. And that far exceeds the conservatism in that area of, say, the German, Italian, French, Spanish, or English conservative parties. Now, there are far-right parties in, say, Germany. And in fact, Vance was in Germany and kind of semi-endorsed the far-right party, which came in second in the German election, although 20%. So they're not going to be in the government. But still, it's kind of a startling thing to do for a vice president. So there's a huge opening of differences when it comes to values. There's also something I'll talk about for a minute, a huge difference in attitude towards government. To the conservative, the government is an enemy. The government's the enemy. It's the deep state. The two things are the same. You're the deep state, it's not some secret, it's the state, actually. That's what it's become in a practical sense. It's the state. So if your base wants to get rid of the government, you're probably smart enough not to do that because a lot of your base gets a lot of money from the government. Like farmers aren't going to be really happy about the tariffs. But you are going to go after foreign aid because it's easy. Most people think we spend too much money on foreign aid, even though it's like 1% total of the budget. The whole budget's defense and Medicare and Social Security. That's the whole budget. Everything else is just chatting. And the Democrats lie about that too. Both parties don't tell the truth about where all our money goes in that sense. So just an extreme difference in power. And then the conservatives in America also have a much stronger taste for authoritarian rule. That is, when asked questions about, would you prefer to have a legislative process or a strong central decision maker, they always say a strong central decision maker. That results are more important than process, and even that results are more important than law. And again, as I said at the beginning, we all need to look inside a little bit because I think we all have a little bit of the internal. I wish somebody that just agreed with me was God, as opposed to somebody who disagrees with me. So big gaps, big changes. David Brooks said it, I think, he said it well. In Trump's world and the people that he likes, and I guess about half of America, roughly, they code the world hard and soft. Brooks looks at it as, who's a Republican himself, he looks at it as a civilizational struggle, hard and soft. Trump is not playing four-dimensional chess, etc. It's just whatever Trump's moment urging is. He's been a lifelong sort of military virility guy. And in the MAGA mind, and this is the quote, Putin codes hard, Western Europe codes soft. Musk codes hard, USAID codes soft. WWE is hard, universities are soft. Struggles for dominance are hard, alliances are soft. And that's the organizing principle. And many people like that. I mean, it's a majority human view through time, in a lot of ways. The world is a power struggle, and the tough people win. Some of the drivers of this are economic anxiety. Certainly in Springfield, Ohio, that's it. Fear of the other, in many ways. Grievance, feeling like my people aren't being treated well. And the white grievance is kind of a relatively newish thing, but it's not brand new. It's probably been around longer than I'm letting on, really. But I think they can all fall under the umbrella of anti-government. For example, anti-taxes, anti-gun control, anti-regulations on religion, anti-regulation in general, anti-foreign aid, anti-DEI, anti-transgender laws, and anti-immigration can all fall under government. I knew it was over in Pennsylvania when I saw this commercial. We probably don't see it here because you didn't get me. How many commercials do you get in Massachusetts? I can't remember exactly. It was short, grainy, kind of scary a little bit, and it had various transgender people, like in the army or in jail, and in situations which I'm sure are quite rare, but nonetheless, extreme examples, you know what I mean? And it said that, she's for they, them, he's for you. And I had at least 4 or 5 people mention that to me, knocking on the door. That's a lot. 4 or 5 is a lot. Most people wouldn't express any, If they were for Harris, they'd say, yeah, please call me, make sure I vote. But, they're not going to tell me their life story, right? Not the pirate or the pervert knocking on their door. So it had an effect on people, which I find interesting. But it did. It really did. For a lot of women, it was a safety issue. They felt like their children were unsafe. And women, especially with kids, tend to be safety voters. So those are some drivers. And just the anti-government thing is old. Thoreau was, probably in our minds saying, must be a lefty. Didn't have a gun. I don't think he did. He wasn't much of a hunter.
The shoot birds out of the sky as a naturalist.
Yeah, probably had something. But, not only is that government, which governs least, it should be like governs not at all. I don't really know if he felt that way. He was pretty active in his town in a lot of ways. But it's an old, the Constitution is anti-government, right? The Federalist Papers are often anti-government. The Federalist Papers were very afraid of what I think, and again, this is partisan, I admit, but what I think is happening now is what the entire Federalist Papers were written to stop. And that's demagoguery. The word democracy is hardly ever mentioned. It's not mentioned. I don't think it's mentioned in the Constitution. Brian will probably know. And it's only mentioned a few times in the Federalist Papers, and often in a negative context. But the notion of a demagogue taking over the country and ignoring the law is mentioned constantly. And they were most afraid of Congress and the courts and the president in that respect. They really wanted the president to be fairly weak. So I feel like we've kind of set us up where we are. I don't need to go through much of this. Why is the country becoming this divided? I think there's a few stories that we can tell. I don't think any of them are 100% right, but they're worth contemplating. One is the technology story. Social media is driving people apart. I don't do social media anymore. I'm not bragging. I just don't. I have a Facebook account, but if I look at it once or twice a year, I'm surprised. I don't get any notifications. I got off at Twitter when Musk bought it. My brother doesn't either, but he saw a Facebook, he's 10 years older than me, he saw a Facebook post from a girl he was sweet on, I think, in high school, so it's like, well, look at that. Who wouldn't? And it was sort of like Elon Musk is really doing a lot of bad things to the country. She didn't even say it in an inflammatory way. It was just an observation. You can agree with that or not, it doesn't matter. So anyway, she got like 300 or 400 negative comments, and many of them involving ugly forms of death back from that. So these are some stories you can look at, you know, the economic, sociological, we sort of talked about them, but this is how we became divided. So how are we going to act as citizens in the world? So let me see what time it is. It's 2. I can see that far, unfortunately.
There's one right here, right there.
No, so it's almost 2, so I've been 50 minutes so far. But that's good. So I'm going to first spend 10 minutes on just asking, before I talk about some suggestions and some ways of looking at being a citizen, I'd like to hear from you, like, what challenges are you finding, and what are you doing? Yes?
Do you think we would be better off as a country if we had a parliamentary system opposed to the force past the post two-party system?
I don't know. I don't. It's very hard to predict what would happen in a massive country of 330 million people when you make a change like that. I mean, on the one hand, the parties would have more control because they could put the list of the parties together. You could have quotas. You could say 50% of the legislature has to be women because you'd have a list, and the parties would have to put a certain number of women on the list at the top. Both parties. So those would be changes. Whether some of the underlying dynamics, whether it would magnify them or not, I don't know. I mean, England elected Boris Johnson, although he's not the same. So I don't know the answer to that. There would be differences, though, but I don't know.
I was just going to say, being older, I don't go out and do a lot of physical things like protests or whatever, but I've donated to the American Civil Liberties Union and participated in that postcard thing that went out on March 15th where everybody wrote to the White House. I haven't heard what happened with that, but...
So donations and activism at home, but yeah.
And from home mostly.
Within your boundaries.
Bringing you here, of course, was a...
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah. To get some dialogue going to help one another.
Yeah. Yes.
Rather than talk about theoretical other governments, I think it's critical to think about what we can do with what we got.
Yeah.
And to me, one of the vital things is to encourage participation in local government, particularly in boards of education, where I see the thrust of the Republican Party is to establish ultra-conservatives in that area, particularly with the assistance of the Heritage Society and those ilk, whose object obviously is a theocracy.
I was on the Amherst School Committee. School committee politics would be pretty nasty.
School committee had for 8 years.
In Hadley?
No, I was president, but I also held elective office and was a, similar to you, Republican.
Well, I got elected from Pelham.
municipal chairman.
It was like 12-3 or something. I don't know. Pretty small election.
Yeah.
I knew everybody that voted for me, and I didn't want to know the people that didn't. I was afraid I'd run into them, you know. So what do you do as citizens? We're here, but what else? There's someone else.
Protest.
Yes.
We're doing the Mount Town Road protest signs above 91 on Tuesdays.
Oh, okay. What do they say?
The Indivisible group.
The invisible group?
Indivisible.
Oh, indivisible.
Indivisible.
But you might, I mean, given what's happening, you might have to become invisible. Yes.
Yeah, I've been to that too, the overpass, and I'm also going on April 5th to Boston. But I also feel like, really, does it matter? I don't know.
Mhm.
What, like, there's no, you know, and I keep on getting, sign this, I sign. Then they always ask for a donation on my phone and email. There's too many things to contribute to. There's too many, you know, divided conflicts, I guess. But, yeah, I mean, I'll go, but I don't really, just because I need to go for me, but does
Yep.
it help? I don't
Right.
know.
That's an
But I like to
interesting,
do it.
interesting comment. I'm going to get back to that, but the notion of activism, but then a feeling that you're just overwhelmed at the same time. I think somebody, yes?
Yeah, so I have a younger daughter in college, and we went to a Brooklyn voter meeting on Thursday night. She came from the spring break, and she came out with us. And, you know, one of the things is how do we get that demographic to vote more, to be a little more active, and have them create the message for young people that can counter the WW Federation message that got Trump kind of elected with the boy groups. So that's one thing I wonder about, you know, TikTok or, you know, those social medias that might make a difference, that 3%, or to save your judicial system at this point. So, you know, the Wisconsin vote is coming up for that state Supreme Court
Right.
position that is very close, that Musk is donating millions of dollars. So do you have also any comment about that? Do you think it'll make a difference? We can fight that situation or win?
Right. I was startled to read that in Wisconsin, first-time voters voted, were majority voter for Trump. Given, because they don't have to be, but generally a first-time voter will be younger. No, it doesn't have to be, but they probably. Yeah, that's interesting.
I'm thinking about the Senate, and there are 33 Senate seats that are going to be.
Yeah.
And all but one is Republican, I believe.
No, it's, I looked it up, I can't remember, but there's actually more Republican seats up. But in terms of how many tough seats, maybe there's only one Republican.
Because I'm wondering if the focus was more into how do we take over the House,
Yeah,
and how do we take over the Senate,
right,
position us so that this, what's going on right now will not last 4 years.
right. Mm-hmm.
Because it could be a way of ending.
Right.
His
Or ameliorating it, yeah, right.
I can't believe what's going on now in this new administration of Trump's. People I spoke to or heard interviewed in various mediums said, oh, he was so much better on the economy in the first administration, and that's why I'm voting for him. It's going to be great on the economy. That's not a major thing for me, but I think that Trump lies so much, it's hard to know what to believe of him. But I'm seeing things playing out. I'm not educated in political science, never attended a class, but I have been watching a news channel, not Fox. MSNBC has some good panelists, and people that are interviewed. And I've learned a lot, and I don't think it's a bunch of baloney, but I missed a few little things yesterday, but on a show I like a lot is Deadline White House, and they were interviewing a Canadian citizen who apparently drives down to someplace in America for work, and then she goes back home. And she got detained, I don't know, if it was within the month of March or something, but it was recently. 5 Americans pulled her over, stuck her in a cell, that reminded me of cells I've seen on that TV show, the SEAL team, the Bear Stone, the light kept on, and the silvery type blankets that Trump used to give the kids he put in cages. They kept her there for a long period of time. Nobody was told anything. She was in there with 5 other women. One had been there for 10 months. They weren't allowed anything. She said, we were given some food, and I didn't eat. I didn't trust the food. I meditated and prayed, and I don't know how she finally got out, but she was finally rescued. But the fact is,
It is interesting. I mean, it's a terrible story, but if somebody had been there for 10 months, then Biden put her there.
this is truly scary. I was scared to begin with. When people were first starting to vote, and my husband's friend was, oh, the one I said, I've seen this man years before. I said, I don't like about him. And that's anything that's really good, is my opinion. But,
Well, let's get another comment real quick, unless you have a question at the end.
well, no, I just said, believe me, if you vote for this man, he's going to take us all down to hell in a handbasket.
About, does it seem like it makes a difference when it comes to so really, this is a little more philosophical politics, but we're making existential choices. We're making choices about how to live. That's what I'm talking about. So that's a nonpartisan thing. If you're a Trump opponent or a Trump supporter, everything I say from now on is 90% of it is going to apply to both of you, because people that really like Donald Trump, they don't like their opponents any more than you like him. And I know that's a hard thing to wrap your arms around. Maybe that's one of the things that we all need to work on a little bit. And that's one of the things I'm talking about. Is again, we can't hide the fact that this is uncomfortable. There's always been disputes in this in democracy. There's always been disagreements about what to do. It strikes me as worse, and I'm not going to try to defend that. It just does. And I think one of the things, at least in my mind, bothers me is not so much what the president is doing, some of which does bother me. But I don't get up every morning and look at the news and say, well, look at the latest deprivation of Trump. He's probably some of the things he does is what anyone would like. But there's so many Americans see the world so differently. I mean, radically different. If someone is an African American and experienced discrimination, and they talk to me about the discrimination they've experienced, I can understand that. I couldn't be there, but it would fit into my box of understanding for what I've seen in my life. Some things that people believe now, they don't. You know what? Maybe they always have. Maybe they always have. I teach a lot of students, and I teach a class on conspiracy theories. And the kind of stuff people believe is kind of scary. I mean, it's not just the United States. I used to speak a lot in Iraq, and I'm telling you, I didn't even know. I didn't know anybody really cared about the Masons. I don't know what the hell they are. They're a bunch of guys that got drunk on a regular basis, which every men's club does, and then they raise money for kids. I mean, the definition of a men's club: raise money for kids, you're drunk. Okay. But boy, you go overseas, the stuff you hear. Monica Lewinsky is the Jewish agent trying to bring down Bill Clinton. This huge crowd of like 200 people, and I kept getting these questions about the Trilateral Commission. What's another one? 3 R's. Tries for 3. And Bitburgers, anyone heard of them? And then finally, I got so sick of some of these questions. It's all about the Jews. Every conspiracy eventually comes down to somebody who's Jewish. You don't have to scratch very far. It's like gambling. You don't have to scratch very far to get solidified something cool. Conspiracy theories all are based on the same stuff. But I get so tired of it, people will be like, well, isn't America and Tel Aviv running the Arab Spring? It's like, yeah. Yeah. There's a bunker. Tel Aviv, they orchestrated the whole thing. You guys like, it didn't seem to bother me, actually, it's true. Because it's so much easier to be able to blame somebody else for your own problems. That's what conspiracy theories can show you. Yes. But, you know, the point is, how am I living in that world? How do I live in that world? Like, what do you do? We have a conversation with somebody who says that we never landed on our children. You know, what do you do when you say George Bush knew about 9/11? Or that Barack Obama was actually born in Kenya?
Yeah.
You know, what I do now is I say, well, that's really interesting. I'm going to go get another train. Because there's no point in wasting your time arguing something like that. It's like arguing whether or not there's a God. It's how do you argue that point? You believe or you don't. And that's, you know, that's the way that is. The most common choice, though, to make an observation, I should have two most common. One is to withdraw. And I'm not saying withdrawing is the worst thing. I call it later in the slide, I'll just get ahead, call it the TMD method, tender garden. You know, if the world is not going your way, maybe it's time to focus on your family, reading hobby, whatever time you used to spend politically, and don't read the news. I would never tell my students that because they're at an age where they should be gathering knowledge and building it. But you get to be a certain age, and there's not that much new under the sun. You can leave for 3 months and come home. Do all the same stuff. I just did it. There's a few things that shocked me after a bit, but my life wasn't made better by knowing them. The life of going around me was made better. I think we're often under and over-informed. We're over-informed because we spend too much time looking at the news. Under-informed because we only read the news we agree with. I watch Fox once a week. I don't like it. It doesn't seem real to me. But I watch it because I want to know what people are thinking. You know, it's important to know that. But the other, as far as the other common reaction is, and I'm advising against this, I'm engaged in it myself, is complain, worry, agonize, and obsessively read news of your own choice. I mean, how often you go to dinner or lunch with somebody and the topic of the conversation now changes to, oh my God, did you see this? I read this, demented it, or, you know, it just goes down this dark hole. It doesn't make lunch any better. There might be a sharing aspect to it, or we feel like, get down off my chest. You know, and God forbid you go out with a group of people that don't have the same views. Be for a faster lunch.
Of course, not just.
That's why I'm glad I like sports. I can talk to anybody about sports. I could walk into a redneck bar in southern Texas, and my accent is pretty bad to begin with. It gets worse when I talk to my brother, or if I went to Texas. But, you know, I could talk all day about football. I could find something common to talk about kids, grandchildren. I mean, I could go in a bar and share pictures of my grandson. I'm surprised I haven't done it here. It might be the longest period of time I've gone in 2 years with a shared picture. Oh, my 3-year-old grandson. But we do that, and I don't think it's healthy to do that. I don't think it's healthy. Occasional sharing with friends, of course, but the constant obsessive agonizing over it. And maybe that might sound to you callous. But ask yourself, if I become better informed than I know, is it making my life better? Or even is it making me a better citizen? I don't know the answer to this. I know the answer to the first one. It's no. Second part. But there is, you know, this is I'm writing a book on comparing Buddhism and Stoicism. It's a vanity book. I do it for myself. That's actually it's I told him about doing a talk like many times. I can't imagine any human beings would possibly listen to a talk this long So he must have assumed the talk. So I've been thinking a lot about the Stoic zone of control, which is also reflected in the Alcoholics' Prayer. That goes back long before that. And Reinhold Niebuhr was the current version of the AA prayer. That goes back to Epictetus. And every culture has their own version of it. And what is it to be properly educated? It's learning to apply the natural preconceptions to the right things according to nature, not according to what nature is. And beyond that, to separate the things that lie within our power from those that don't. So this is really what you said when you said, you give money, and then you mentioned that you feel like a little overwhelmed by you volunteering. And I guess what I'm suggesting, and this is how I really got through the election, to be honest, is going door to door. I'm not suggesting door to door, but doing something specific that was difficult. I knew it wasn't going to make a difference. I mean, if Harrison won, I'd take full credit for it. I'd be here like, oh yeah, I was in one county in Pennsylvania. Honestly, it could have been something. Not that 800 doors. Only 6 or 7 parrot jokes. But, regardless, do what is in your power. Don't worry about it making a difference. That's what I mean. I mean, don't do something stupid. If you would analyze something, you find it's a waste of time, or I'm giving money to this crappy organization. They're taking my postcards and they're throwing them away. You're smart about what you do. So what am I going to do this election? I'm going to look, and someone mentioned it, I think he left. And I'm looking for a congressional seat, preferably somewhere in upstate New York, because I'm from, there's nothing in Massachusetts. There's nothing here. And Pennsylvania doesn't, I don't think, offer any more possibilities. It might. Anyway, find one that's got a good candidate and is winnable seat. I know how to figure that part out. And then just be your worker bee. If they want me to do more, I'll do more, but otherwise I'll just do whatever they tell me to do. And that's within my power. But you got to put your body out there. And that's the other thing. Is if you're really upset, do something within your power. That's a Buddhism. But, I would suggest read less, or at least be more selective. If you're into one thing, pick one thing. If you're into immigration issues, there's plenty of local people who volunteer on both sides of the issue. Talk less. Speaking. So, and act more. Do more things. You'll feel better about it. Does that sound therapeutic? Yeah, it is therapeutic. And will it make a difference? Probably not make a difference. Your voting doesn't make a difference either. You vote because it's our duty, it's our job. It's a job as human beings in democracy to vote. Is your one vote going to make a difference? I mean, it could, it has. No problem. But it's your job to do stuff. But don't expect it to make that big of a difference. Or hold it loosely. Have fun. Don't lose touch with your family. Don't get angry about the world. Because it's not going to help the world. I also would suggest you seek to understand the opponent. What's going on in the minds of other people? Now, you might get angry about that. You might go, well, they're not making any effort to understand me. You can't control it. You want to control what you do. And the more you understand, it's not going to make you agree. But you might be surprised in some ways to see how people see the world. That might alone make you a better citizen. I am glad I came from Southern Ohio. I lived in a very different place than here. But I think that was good to see that. I don't want to move back. Some of the actions you can take, as I mentioned, tend your own garden. Be civic, be volunteer, join. Lots of you do that. Be locally involved. That's Tocqueville's suggestion now, American democracy and say lawyers and local government. If you're a lawyer or legally involved, get involved in cases. There's a lot of law to go on in the next 3 years. Reach out to friends so you're not lonely. Write. If you're a good writer, write for a local paper. Be political. Volunteer for something for 2026. Talk less, act more. Try to understand your opponent. And those work for both sides, not just one. So these all come from an author named these three from an author named Timothy Snyder. He wrote 20 Lessons for the 20th Century. It's a great little book. If I was really rich, I'd carry it around, well, when I carry it in a box. They're little books. And it's about Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia, and about how they got to where they got. Now, am I saying that's going to happen in the U.S.? No, it's not. But I am saying that there are things I'm seeing that are becoming more authoritarian. And you may not see them, but that's what I see. And one of the things is do not obey in advance. Don't be afraid. You know, I would be happy to give this talk in Halloween. I wouldn't care. Nobody's, people that write those nasty notes, I never do. But again, that's why I don't look at Facebook. Practice corporeal politics. Who said in the group that they're going down this something in Boston? Yeah, so that's corporeal. Put your body on the line. Now, I might ask you to throw yourself into a fire. Yeah, but you'll feel better going and seeing all these people. Will it make a huge difference? Those kind of things, in a cumulative sense, do make a difference. And I think they'll make a difference to you. But you gotta put your body in there. One of the things I got so annoyed with my students is they're like, oh, I hate this guy. I'm gonna work against you in Cambridge. Like, why? Why? Cambridge is gonna vote 80%. Whoever you think. If you really want to help, move. Not move physically, just go to Ohio. Go to Florida, go to Pennsylvania. But these aren't easy things. And sometimes we find ourselves in a place in life where they can be done. A lot of the people that I volunteer with in Pennsylvania, they have jobs, they drove in from another state every weekend. Some of them had recently retired. You know, there's this box of retirement where you're still, yeah, I can go do this, you know, but I have the time to be able to do it. So practice, use your body in politics. And I would, to the extent that you can, even when you disagree with some institution, you should try to defend an institution. Because institutions, in the end, all we have. Without institutions, there's no deal. It's just a raging river. Overall. So these are just some thoughts I've had about citizenship. Now I'm going to stop there, but open it up to anybody if anyone has any questions, or if you want to duck out, because I think I've reached my appointed time. Yeah, I think we're supposed to be out here by 2:30.
Right.
So I have like 2 questions. If you have yes and no. There's somebody, I see again.
Hi, thank you. The courts seem to be one of the institutions worth defending, and they're under attack. And there's usually a summer session of the Supreme Court, and even though the court was pretty skewed 6-3 against or for Trump, what do you think the odds are that some of his policies will be overturned in a way that will be, legitimate and cooperated with by the administration?
I think the first part is some will be voting. I think Roberts issued a warning to that effect last week. I think there's going to be some questions about the ability of the executive to simply fire civil servants, which violates the Civil Service Act. Questions about deportation, trying to use the bill that passed in 1781 or something.
Yeah.
The enemy.
And yeah.
They're blatantly, he's done some things that are undoubtedly blatantly illegal. I mean, executive order to end birthright citizenship, simply, it's written. But he knows the courts are going to push back. And they're just pushing whatever edge they can push.
Right.
And if no one opposes them, they win. The second part of your question, whether the administration will obey the court orders, I can't answer that. You would have said 6 months ago, yeah, they will, because at the end of the day, they're not going to blow up the United States government.
He sort of ignored Roberts and pushed back pretty hard on it. I don't know what's gonna happen.
Yeah, but he's been attacking judges.
Yeah, yeah. Since the eighties.
He certainly knows more judges. So yeah, I think yes on the first, and I don't know on the second. So last question, I think.
So the difficulty with being sanguine about whether your efforts and activism and protest make any difference and whether they just make you feel better is that the stakes are so high. You know, we may have the privilege in Massachusetts of being sheltered by a blue state and having it not affect us personally, at least immediately. But if we're looking at the end of the American experiment, you know, the end of the constitutional republic, if they're following the, you know, Viktor Orban playbook and we're turning into Hungary, you know, it's you know, a pivotal moment in history and globally, not just for the US. So it's difficult to take that attitude.
Well, I didn't say it was easy,
Yeah.
but I am still going to stand by it, that the attitude that most, it doesn't, I'm not sure what I would agree with everything you said. But I'm not sure that if I acted like that, thought like that all the time, my life would benefit. My actions would still be the same as yours. And so acting in a certain way is different from holding on to it so tightly that it comes to ruin you and the relationships around you. I guess that's what I'm saying. And that would be a sort of more Buddhist, it's in my book. Buddhist is you know, some people say that Buddhism and Stoicism too a little bit, but Buddhism is quiescent. That in fact, there's been lots of Buddhist activists, but they try to act in a non-violent way, which was not too much, honestly, historically my first inclination. But also in a way where you're trying to attach to the view, and it's very difficult. It's very difficult to walk that line, but I think in the end, that line makes you better at everything you do as a citizen. But it is very, I have no doubt it's extremely difficult.
You have one more question over here.
Okay,
Oh, well,
I don't have to go anywhere.
sure. You mentioned, travel and work in both other parts of the US and also other parts of the world. And you also mentioned, the distinction, which I think it's good to remind New Englanders, I also wasn't born here, but it was just about 20 years, that the town, like a formal organization in New England, is a much bigger deal. You know, the town of Hadley is what helped sponsor this event, and also than the county, which is historically a much bigger deal in the rest of the country. And I think, do you think, maybe off the top of the head, because it's not a super common question, but what kinds of forms of engagement there might be on a town level that are more possible for people in New England than maybe where you have to drive 20 miles to another part of the county to do something? You know, I mean, Hadley's a fairly civically clustered town geographically as well. Any thoughts come to mind here?
Well, New England does offer people more opportunities for civic engagement in small towns, medium-sized towns even too, really. Although sadly, people don't generally take advantage of it. I think many of you are quite well aware of how low turnout is in town elections and that kind of thing. But nonetheless, there's a lot of activity. Amherst, all their boards are filled, and they rotate. I've met thousands of people in the town of Amherst that have some experience in government, which often means just going to meetings and hearing the opinions of other people. Everybody in Amherst has an opinion. So, you know, they go on forever. Amherst is the only place I know that will spend like 3 months of meetings trying to decide what the rules for the meeting should be. That's a human characteristic. So on one hand, I think New England does offer a lot of opportunities for that. It's one of the reasons I really like New England. So it's a very interesting question or comment. I tend to agree with it. And that's what Tocqueville said. Well, the United States, the South, the North, and the East. And he admired the New England form of government because it gave people experience. With essentially dealing with other human beings that they don't like, you don't agree with. So thank you very much. This was